What if I told you Apple wasn't the very first company to build an iPhone? What I'm referring to is a mobile phone with a high-resolution color touchscreen, a web browser, and even an app store. You see, most people remember Steve Jobs stepping on stage in 2007 and bending history. And yes, don't get me wrong, Apple changed the game. But here is the part you weren't told. In 2004, Nokia's R&D team had a secret prototype. It had a high-resolution color touchscreen and a web browser. They even had a tablet prototype in 2001 and a conceptualized idea of an app store. This was a smartphone model that could have possibly evolved into something like this should Nokia had developed a better operating system other than Symbian. But Nokia's leadership killed it. They called it a toy gadget with an expensive glass screen. They were too busy milking their cash cows to notice they had just invented the future and thrown it in the trash. This is the greatest fallout story in tech history, and here's what you've never been told. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Nokia phones were everywhere. Durable, reliable, simple. Their slogan, connecting people, wasn't just marketing, it was reality. Nokia engineers were some of the best in the world. They understood hardware deeply, they understood mobile networks better than most competitors. That's when their R&D team came up with a smartphone prototype in 2004, and if they had released them, the world would look very different today. This was the stage when people looked up to Nokia like the tech giants they were, but this giant was afraid of one David: greenfield development. The fear of rebuilding software from scratch ended up creating organizational paralysis, not because they didn't have the funds to fund it, but because they had built a kingdom that was already shipping iconic products. I mean, the entire business model was built around dumb phones, and it worked. Around this time, the company was averaging $37 billion in valuation. Hence, they didn't see the need to bench Symbian and reinvent. What's that popular saying? If it isn't broke, don't fix it, right? And so Nokia's leadership killed the project. Why? Because the smartphone screens were expensive and the App Store idea seemed niche. They were already successful in the market selling their flagship model, so why risk it all on a fantasy with a glass screen? Fortunately and unfortunately, winning makes you trust what worked yesterday, but it also tends to blind you from what is changing today and what might not work in the near future. By 2007, Nokia had become the most powerful mobile phone manufacturer on the planet, as they owned over 40% of the global market. 4 out of every 10 people with a phone in their pocket had a Nokia. They were invincible. They had billions in the bank and the best developers in the world. And yet, within 5 years, they were dead. But here's the twist. Nokia didn't fail because they were lazy or because they made bad products. Far from it. They failed because they were too good at being Nokia. Let me explain that for a second. For 12 good years until 2012, Nokia was king. They didn't just sell phones, they defined what a phone was. They globalized the internal antenna with the Nokia 3310. They were the first to make the camera phone a mainstream success with the Nokia 7650. They were the first to popularize mobile gaming with Snake. They were so successful that they became a victim of the innovator's dilemma. When you own 40% of the market, you don't want to change the world. You want to protect your kingdom. So every new idea was measured against one question: will this hurt our current sales? The thing is, they weren't blind, they were just comfortable. And in tech, comfort is a death sentence. It's January 2007. Steve Jobs walks onto a stage and introduces the iPhone 2G. Nokia's response? They laughed. They called the iPhone a cool gadget that lacked basic features like 3G or a good battery. They thought people wanted phones that happened to have some tech, but what they didn't realize was that people now wanted computers that happened to make calls. From a technical perspective, Nokia wasn't wrong, but Apple wasn't competing on specs. Apple was competing on a whole other level. While Nokia evaluated the feature using old metrics, Apple evaluated the feature using human behavior, psychology, and user experience especially. So when Nokia was asking, how durable can this phone be? Apple was like, bet. How does this phone feel to use? Two different questions and entirely two different perspectives on consumer interests. Nokia was trapped in their own operating system, Symbian, which was designed for buttons. Trying to make Symbian work on a touchscreen was like trying to put a saddle on a Ferrari. It was clunky, it was slow, and honestly, developers hated it. So much so that there was this internal joke that no two Nokia phones truly ran the same OS, because different teams customized Symbian per device. Meanwhile, decision-making inside Nokia had become too complex. Every new idea had to pass through committees, regions, partners, and carriers, and by the time consensus is reached, it had been rounded, softened, and made polite. But technically, Nokia kept winning regardless, with a valuation of more than $150 billion. at this point. By 2011, the house was on fire. Nokia's market share was crashing out. And by the time they reacted seriously, Apple had gotten the momentum they needed. And Android was buzzing because developers had chosen sides. Now here's the part that hurts the most. Former Nokia employees later revealed something disturbing. Managers practiced green shifting, which is taking a failing project and reporting it as healthy to avoid angering the bosses. Bad news was softened, problems were delayed and not confronted. Not because people were intentional, but because fear had entered the system. When fear replaces truth, feedback dies, and when feedback dies, reality always wins later. Nokia then tried to pivot with new partnerships and new strategies. But pivots work best before panic sets in, not while during it. They hired a new CEO from Microsoft, Stephen Elop, who sent out the most famous memo in business history, titled The Burning Platform. He told his employees, "We are standing on a burning oil rig and we have to jump." They jumped straight into the arms of Microsoft. They abandoned their own software and bet everything on Windows Phone. It was a disaster because Windows Phone didn't have the apps and it didn't have the users. By 2012, Samsung, who had embraced Android, officially dethroned Nokia as the world's #1 phone maker. Fast forward to 2014, Nokia finally sold its phone business to Microsoft for $7.2 billion, only a fraction of what it was once worth. It felt like the end of an era. But here's the thing, Nokia is still alive, primarily as a telecom network infrastructure company. In 2026, they're a powerhouse in 6G networks and patent licensing. They recently leaned into the AI wave, including a major AI-focused partnership narrative involving NVIDIA, reported as a big strategic move in telecommunication. But they aren't the phone company anymore. The Nokia name you see on phones today, that's just a brand name licensed to another company called HMD Global. Nokia's story isn't a story of a company that missed the future. It's a story of a company that built the future, then got too scared to live in it. Success breeds a fear of failure, and when you are too afraid to fail, you lose the ability to innovate. They didn't lose because they were bad, they lost because they couldn't stop being good for long enough to be great again. Stay curious, stay hungry, and never get too comfortable with your current position. Let me know what business story you would want to hear next, and don't forget to like and share this video. Peace out. Shut up. Alright, you ready? Hey, brightness. Why are you giving me this? This is the greatest fallout story in tech history, and here's what you've never been to. Their slogan, connecting people, wasn't just marketing, it was reality. You're losing breath? Calm down. What if I told you Apple wasn't the very first company to build an iPhone? You went from laughing to frowning. I don't like that. What if I told you Apple wasn't the very first company to build? No, I'm not. It's not on the build. Oh no. Come on, Richmond.